Want to introduce to you once again Dr. David Player. He's been here, been doing a great job, and I know that you're going to be blessed again by his presentation this morning. Would you join me in a word of prayer as he comes up? Heavenly Father, thank you for today, and thank you for the blessing that we have of being together as brothers and sisters in Christ, studying your word, and hearing how you have created us fearfully and wonderfully from Dr. Player. I pray for those who are going on the mission trip this week, serving at Texas Foundation of Hope. I pray that you would do a mighty and amazing work through them to be a blessing to the community. Heavenly Father, thank you for your Son Jesus, for his sacrifice, which means our life. We pray in his name. Amen. Please, once again, give a warm Concordia welcome to Dr. David Player.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you. Good. Oh, good morning again. Everybody hear me? Yeah, oh boy, this is loud. Yeah, good. Thank you. Anybody here today who wasn't here either of the other 2 weeks? Oh my. All that means is I got to do some reviews, okay? You folks that have been veterans, you just have to put up with it. But it'll be reinforced in your mind. It's like everything else in life. You know, you hear it the second time, it means a little more than it made the last time, and you hear it the third time, you're either getting bored with it or you're beginning to incorporate it into your life. So I'll do a little bit of review. We are in the midst of looking at things that God has made available to us intellectually to help us care for our bodies. In our scriptural references, we said for caring for the body, for those of us who are believers, were 1 Corinthians 3 and 1 Corinthians 6. Those two verses I gave you, know you not that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, and the Spirit of God dwells in you. If any man defiles the temple of God, him also will God destroy, for the temple of God is holy. Holy, which temple we are. 1 Peter said, be ye holy, for I am holy, you know. And then in the 6th chapter, he says it a little different way. No, you're not. Your body's the temple of the Holy Ghost, which you have of God, and you're not your own. You're bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in body and in spirit. Sounds like we're supposed to, as I said before, take care of the goods. He gave us a body to take care of. By golly, we're going to go ahead and take care of it. And so we embarked 2 weeks ago on trying to look at that in an organized fashion, and I guess what I'd like you all to come out of this whole thing with at the end of our 4 weeks together is sort of a way of thinking about your body. How do you have to think about health so it doesn't become all some kind of a gamish for you? And so I divided it into 6 categories, you remember, or maybe 7. They've been calling them Dave's Big 6 over at Health by Design, but the first one is body composition. We will want to have good composition, and we already divided that into good muscles, good bones, and good fat. Good muscles, good bones, and good fat, and I'll touch on that in a minute. Then we went to good nutrition, and last week we emphasized that a little bit more. We said our mothers told us we are what we eat, and there's some significance to that. We are what we eat, but we got about halfway through nutrition last week and then bogged down, and I said I'd finish it up this week. Then the third one is that we're going to have good fitness. We're all, whether we're 93 or 3, we're going to be a little athletic, okay? And we'll talk about that in more detail today. We're going to have some good fitness. Number 4, we're going to try to not get poisoned by stuff. And I'm going to try to spend time on that today, at least with a few of the poisons that are available to us, and also dwell somewhat on the poisons within us that can begin to nail us as we get older. And then number 5 is the issue of sleep, and I may get time to talk about sleep a little today, at least in a casual way of looking at what happens to us when we don't sleep. I'll try to do my David Player theatrical production of what obstructive sleep apnea looks like. It may be the last time you come back after I do that for you, okay? And then number 6 is spiritual health, meaning are we angry? Are we depressed? Are we anxious, especially? And other kinds of negative emotions, because all of those things ultimately compromise health. God told us they did in Scripture, and in fact, medical science has proven that chronic stress. And of course, sleep kind of gets into that also. And then finally, the last thing we're going to talk about, or the last category that we should have on our book, is how often do I measure and what do I measure? Do I go to see somebody every once in a while and remeasure how I'm doing in all of those areas? Makes sense, doesn't it? Usually if we don't measure something about us, I usually fail if I don't measure every so often to see how I'm doing. So, I try to get a physical exam once every couple of years from one of my buddies, and I figure that he'll tell me the things I need to know, to be good. So, where we have been so far, for those of you who are new this week, we've been through body composition, and we talked briefly about, first of all, muscles and how to take care of them. And we said, finally, that both for muscles and bones, the secret is you use them and you feed them. You use them and you feed them. And we said for muscles, the food is protein foods. That would be meats, eggs, dairy products, and to some extent beans and nuts. And for bones, at least as far as we know it, it's minerals like calcium and magnesium, and then vitamin D, which facilitates movement of calcium out of your gut and into your blood, okay? And remember also that the key element with bones, I said, was the same one with muscles. We've got these tremendous bones, right? We talked about osteoblasts and osteoclasts and how those osteoblasts work and the osteoclasts stop working when we do muscular work with our bones. So every time you do a push-up, every time you do a curl, every time you carry your 2-year-old grandson somewhere, every time you do dips, as we said, you end up building bone. You tell your bone-making cells, the osteoblasts, I need some more goo, if you will. And you tell your osteoclasts, will you please stop sanding off my bone for me? So that was what we talked about that week when we talked to composition. And then we said, of course, the big problem for our society and compositionally is that we store too much fat. God intended us to store fat. 95% of the people in here can store fat, okay, but we end up storing too much fat because of the kind of culture we live in. And we talked about then how it is we go about losing fat. And we, in talking about losing fat, assuming fat is just purely fat storage, we made 2 important points. Remember that it's not just how much fat you have, it's is the fat hurting you? Because if you have fat and the fat isn't hurting you, then the fat is just a storage site ready to be used when you're in the prison camp, when we're in the tough times in life, when we have surgery, when we need it. The fat is available to us. And we said the ways we can tell whether fat hurts us is whether we can measure something that says the fat is doing us evil. And we talked about distribution of fat. Remember that fat is either stored on your legs and your thighs and your breasts and your shoulders, or fat can be stored right in the middle of your abdomen. And there are some men who never have ever looked very fat. They have skinny legs and skinny butts, but they nevertheless put their 5 pounds of fat right here. And as I told you, sometimes if you store 5 pounds of fat, 2 of it goes in the liver, and 3 of it goes on your hips. And the 2 that went in the liver can hurt you. And we talked about how they hurt you, because they hurt you, and we went into the story of how insulin works in the cells. And we said that, remember, in type 1 diabetes, you have a pancreas who dies. That's a 17-year-old boy or girl who has a blood sugar of 600 and has no insulin. But the other kind of diabetes, the one that all of us in here are more likely to get, is the one where we got lots of insulin. We make more insulin than we ever made before, twice as much, 3 times as much, but it gets up to the liver cell and doesn't work. And the most common reason it doesn't work is because there's too much fat in the liver. In other words, the receptor for insulin, instead of being this big, is this big, and the insulin doesn't fit into the hole. Round peg, square hole, and we all understand that. So the first thing, quite frankly, that we measure when a guy tells me, well, am I really too fat, doctor? I look carefully at both where he or she has her fat stored, when I can see that on a DEXA scanner, but also, is it making their insulin level high? And if an insulin level is above 10, that person's well on their way to becoming a diabetic about 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And if we know it early enough, all of us would change it, wouldn't we? If your doctor told you, hey, not that your sugar's high, but your insulin level is much higher than I like it to be, fasting, then you and I would make the change. We would. We'd try to do something about it. It's just that we haven't known that, and only in the last 5 years that we've been measuring insulin levels in people. So anyway, that's a sign when we have too much fat. And then we went into last week and talked about how to get rid of fat. if we do. And we described ourselves as being a machine that's in one or three states of energy balance, didn't we? We said we are either storing fat today, losing fat today, or in perfect balance with our fat today. And the truth is, God kept it so most of us, most days, are kind of breaking even and holding our own during much of our lives. But we have a net effect in our culture of gaining too much fat, and some of us, it's going to be in our liver where it hurts us. Some of us just going to be on our legs and thighs where it doesn't hurt us very much and isn't too important. And we went into last week discussing that energy balance thing and where are the energies. We know that all of the intake energy comes from foods that we eat. And we started to talk about that last week in nutrition. But the burning of calories, there were some critical points there for those of you who were with us before. Remember, we burn calories three ways. The first one is just sitting here in the chair. That's called your resting metabolic rate. Now again, we're not quite at rest in a dark room in a quiet place. But the fact is, all of us are sitting here at rest, and I'm telling you, you're burning a bunch of calories while you're there, aren't you? Just think of yourself. I am sitting here burning calories this morning. That's cool. Now again, it isn't a lot of calories, but it's 60% of what you're going to burn today is burned just sitting here in front of me. That's cool, isn't it? We discussed the things that control that. And remember that it's your thyroid hormone levels, that they've got to be right, and you can check that with your doctor. And we said having good muscles makes us burn more calories when we are sitting in the chair. So if you have a 3 times a week, 5-minute muscle program, and we talked about the 2 groups of muscles that were most important to us. What were they? These. The quads, right? Because they help us walk to the John when we're old, right? Right? Okay. And then these that help catch us when we trip when we're old. Those are our 2 most important groups of muscles. And we said if we have good muscles, if we do a little something for all of our muscles every week, probably no more than twice a week, doing a few reps of something, by golly, our muscles are a little more dense, a little more hot, and burn more calories per day while we are sitting at our desk. Is that not cool? If we're people who store fat and want to get rid of some fat, it's always nice to have that extra 100 calories a day that you burned simply because your muscles were a little more dense. And it can happen in both women and men. Men get bigger muscles, but women can have muscles that burn more calories when they're sitting in their chair simply because they use them Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So never forget that having good muscles, God gave them to us. We need to take good care of them, and they'll help us to burn more calories even when we're sitting in a chair. Okay. And then after talking about resting metabolic rate, we moved into the fact that most of our volitional calories we burn are doing things, exercising, walking, physical work. That's 30% of the calories we burn. And then the last 10% was the one we focused on last week a little bit. Remember, what's the last way we burn calories? 10% of our calories? Anybody remember? Digesting food. Eating and digesting. I'm using one of my strong muscles. Okay, now usually I eat way more food than that muscle burns in calories, but nevertheless it starts there in the mouth. And then you make some saliva. That requires energy for your salivary glands. And then as it goes down the esophagus, boom, 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 muscles working, shoving your food down into your stomach. And then the whole process of digesting of nutrients. And we said the key thing I wanted you to remember was that God made it very hard to digest protein and turn protein into energy. And so it's about 5 times as many calories are burned, finally, digesting a gram of protein as digesting a gram of fat and turning it into energy. And the net result of that, of course, is that people that are eating a diet that's rich in protein, which they already needed for their muscles anyway, when they eat that diet that's rich in protein, they burn more calories digesting it. And we commented that Dr. Atkins wrote his first book on that back in the 1950s, eating all the steak and eggs that you wanted, and you will waste away if you don't eat too many carbs with it. And then Dr. Catan wrote the Zone Diet, and Dr. Sears wrote the Sugar Busters Diet, and finally Dr. Agustin wrote the South Beach Diet. in the 1990s. The best of all those books, I think. But the truth is, they're based on the premise that 10% of your calories are burned digesting food, and you burn a lot more eating protein than you do eating fat. Almost 7 to 2 to 1, protein to carbohydrates to fats. So if I drink some oil, that takes absolutely nothing to digest that and turn it into energy. If I eat some carbs, like a piece of fruit or a piece of bread, that takes a little bit more energy to turn it into energy. And if I eat a piece of steak, it takes a heck of a lot more calories to digest it. Now you say, do you ever burn as many calories as were in the food? No way. God wouldn't have done that to us. Somebody did mention that there was something like that, maybe jalapenos or something, that you burn so many calories just digesting it because they're so hot. But the truth is, so we should, if we were going to use up body fat, we would always say it would be pretty smart to eat a substantial portion of what we eat as protein, wouldn't it? That's what we'd emphasize in our diet. And then we went in, finally finishing that, we went to, well, what happens when I cut my calories back or I exercise a lot in an effort to start losing body fat? And I told you critical things happen that that are important to us when we think about dieting. The first is that the minute you and I cut our calories back, let's say I need 2,000 and I eat 1,200 that day. I'm 800 calories behind, aren't I? And the minute I go that 800 calories down, if I were measuring my metabolic rate with an oxygen consumption machine, I'd find that my calories burned, my resting metabolism went down about 18 or 20% and stopped. You know, it never stops. You keep burning calories. You can't make yourself shut off. It'd be a great army, wouldn't it, if you didn't have to feed your soldiers? You know, but the truth is, but when we go on a diet, our metabolism drops by about 20%. Because God is saying, gee, minute, she's going to get in trouble here if she doesn't start eating. Now, he knew you did it because you were wanting to use up some fat. But the second thing, remember, that happens, if you were measuring in a bucket of urine, you were measuring how much urea comes out, which I told you urea contains nitrogen, and nitrogen comes from protein in the body. And if you were measuring your bucket of urea day after day after day, and you cut your calories back, what happens to the urea? Up, up, up it goes, meaning that you're wasting protein-rich products from your body, and the only thing you can do at that point to try to be in balance is increase your protein again. So a person who's planning to lose body fat or exercising excessively needs to keep protein rich. I think we've heard enough about protein, and then I merged last week and left body composition and moved off into nutrition, and we talked about protein first, and I hit all of those points and said, where do we find protein? Well, we find protein in all of our meats. What I didn't mention very much last week, and somebody came and asked me about it, was the issue of amino acids. Remember that proteins in our body are made of amino acids, of the breakdown products of protein. And there are about a little over 20 of them that all of us can go get at HEB today in foods. But only 13 of them are amino acids that have all of the nitrogen in them that we need to make all of our structural proteins. They're called essential amino acids. The other 7 or 8, we can make in our body out of carbohydrate foods and some nitrogen coming from other protein. Isn't that interesting? So 13 of them are essential, meaning I got to have them. I can't make them in my body. The other 7 pieces you can make in your body. And the problem is that dairy products, meats, and eggs all contain all 13 of those essential amino acids, but rice doesn't and beans don't. But as Dave Ramsey says, if you're poor and you need it, you eat rice and beans. He would say that because if you eat rice and beans together, or the right 2 vegetable items together, you can get all of your amino acids between the 2 of them. Make sense? And we said that the only perfect food that's ever happened in life happened in Exodus chapter 6 or 8, wasn't it? And it was called manna. Manna. And the people were bored with it, but it must have been a dang good food. And it must have had all of the essential amino acids in it. Not only that, but it had all of the carbohydrates and stuff in it that were needed to run their bodies and let them do whatever you do out in the desert, you know. So anyway, we got that kind of down. I hope you've kind of got those important things about protein. So the major protein foods that are important to us are meats, eggs, and dairy products. They have all of the essential amino acids, but you can be a vegetarian and eat bread, eat rice, and eat beans, and you'll have enough of the amino acids that you can live for the rest of your life that way too, if you want to. I think one of the problems with the beans and rice diet is that I end up with too many calories, and I don't break even, and I don't lose weight if I did that, if I eat too many beans. And the beans would also make me feel bloated too if I ate that many, I think. So anyway, that's how you should view the management of body composition and the initial things about nutrition. Now, we talked a little bit last week after we talked about protein. We talked about carbohydrates. Remember, carbohydrates we find in fruit, all the grain items, that's wheat, oats, rye, barley, and so forth, all the vegetables, and some dairy products. Dairy products contain one sugar called lactose. And the older we are, the less we tolerate it. We drink a lactose, and it doesn't digest well, and it takes water with it, and we end up having bloating and gassy and runny stools and so forth. So the older we are, almost everybody gets that. And some racial groups all have lactose intolerance. But dairy, that's the sugar that's in dairy. But in general, when I think of carbohydrates, I think of fruits, vegetables, and grains. And the interesting thing about carbohydrates, as we talked about 2 weeks ago, is that all carbohydrates raise our blood sugar when we eat them. All carbohydrates raise your blood sugar when you eat them. If I have simple, and I should have included simple sugars, like what I eat when I eat sherbet, okay, or something that has simple sugar in it. Anything that raises your blood sugar demands what from your pancreas? Insulin. And insulin's supposed to go up with the food. When your sugar goes up, your insulin goes up. And then the insulin's supposed to let the sugar get into the cells. And then the insulin comes right back down, we hope, to 2 to 5, not 15 to 20. If insulin stays high, at least in laboratory animals, they get plaques in their arteries, in their carotids, in their coronaries, and other parts of their body. So as I will say when I get to poisoning in a while, the only two things I know that cause plaques to grow in necks and coronaries. The only things I think I know for sure, I don't know much anymore for sure, but for sure I think smoke and high insulin levels cause that disease that causes so many of us to die. So anything that raises insulin levels and keeps them up high hurts us. Insulin, however, when we eat a carbohydrate, it goes up and comes right down. That doesn't hurt us at all. That's what God intended for it. That's why we have insulin. It's supposed to go up and go back down. It's not supposed to go up and come back to here. It's supposed to go right back down where it came from, to between 2 and 5. Got that whole picture? And the reason that most people, it goes up and goes up to 15 and stays at 12 is because they had too much fat stored in their liver. There are other stresses that can do that too, like pregnancy and taking prednisone, steroids for things. Oh, I forgot one more thing that I was going to say. Somebody came up to me last week and said, "You didn't talk at all about the behavioral management of obesity. Why are we so fat anyway? Why do we stay fat? Why isn't this easy for us? You doctor, you talk about all this nutritional stuff. Why the heck do we stay fat?" And of course, the problem with us is that unstoring fat is not easy. God made it tough for us to get rid of how many calories per pound? Yeah, 3,500. 3,500 stored calories is a lot of calories. He did not make it easy for us to get rid of 3,500 calories. And so we have to have a way to get rid of 3,500 calories, and that's not very simple. So we often have other reasons we eat besides need for nutrition, don't we? What do we eat? We eat when we're happy. We eat when the relatives come over. We eat when we're sad. One of our worst ones is we eat when we're addicted. I've been a very bad addictive eater a number of times in my life. I've been bad addictive eater at Christmas time when my wife put green and red M&Ms in dishes in the house. And chocolate is one of the worst addictive foods we have. It contains something called phenylethylamine in it that makes us eat nutty. I, honest to goodness, would think about those M&Ms when I was over at my office, thinking that I'll go home and go to the bathroom, and while I'm there, I'll pass by that room and grab it, right? And recently, I've been on a sherbet addictive eating pattern. I can just sort of dream about eating that bowl of sherbet at 8 o'clock at night. You say, well, that's not consistent with your plan designed to manage your body fat, Dave. And the answer is you're absolutely right. So we eat addictively, and for those of us who have stored too much fat and have too much insulin in our blood and all that stuff, we have to deal with this really pretty spiritually, don't we? And there are programs all over the country. That somebody came up to me last week, one of you folks who's probably out here this morning, and said, well, I've been sort of involved with Overeaters Anonymous for a long time, which is a food analogy for Alcoholics Anonymous, a kind of a 12-step program to deal with food, with overeating of food. And I can't tell you the number of psychology books written about overeating. And they're like Love Hunger book from the Menninger Clinic and transactional analysis, where do I act like an adult or do I act like a child around food, all sorts of nuttiness. But the honest truth is, it's really when we decide to control our body fat, and we have a lot of fat, we have to have a real spiritual sense of going to the Lord with it and saying, I will not accomplish this if I am not spiritually where I need to be. Make sense to everybody? I won't go into that because it's a huge topic. Why do I do what I don't want to do? I would refer you to Romans chapter 7, the end, where Paul said, remember he said, I do what I don't want to do. I don't do what I want to do. I leave undone the things I plan to do. What the Sam Hill is wrong with me, basically? Oh, wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from this body of death? I thank God through my Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, with my mind, I serve the law of the flesh, but with my spirit, the law of God. Paul said it was that way 2,000 years ago, and when I think about diets, it's right there. Romans chapter 7. Now, fortunately, he starts off in Romans 8. Remember the very first verse? There is therefore now no condemnation to them that are in Christ Jesus, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus is in me. So we have a chance, don't we, to deal with our fat. But it's a spiritual deal. We have to give it to the Lord, and we have to be smart. And what I told the lady last week, and I say again always at Health by Design, is over the years, after looking at 30,000 people who were working on body fat, it became clear to me that to manage body fat well, you have to have three things. You have to get really educated with this stuff that I'm talking about and understanding what's in food and all those things. You have to be accountable to somebody. You have to say, I'm going to show up and tell you what I did this week or what I plan to do next week. And third is you have to have good tools to use. Good tools meaning good tennis shoes, good record-keeping form, now God has given us phone apps, like the little phone app that's MyFitnessPal that all of us can put into our phones, to record our calories. Good jock straps, good athletic bras, good record-keeping forms, good diet supplements, good food. All of those are your tools that fit with your intellect. You with me on that? You won't do well if you're not accountable, if you're not educated, and if you don't have good tools. You might get away with doing 2 out of the 3 and lose a bunch of fat and stay pretty good. But if you plan to stay a certain way and live well in your body, you're going to have all 3 of those together. Obviously, education is ongoing. God hasn't told us everything we need to know yet, but most of what we need to know. Number 2, being accountable. There at Health by Design, it would be with one of my nurses. My head nurse, Rose, is so good. I hate to have to go in and tell her what I ate. I just hate it. I hate it. But I do remember during the next week that I've got to still go back and see Rose. The Roman Catholic Church learned about that 700 years ago, didn't it? Said if I go show up and see Father McGillicuddy on Friday and I'm going to tell him what I did, I'm less likely to do something in the middle of the next week if I know I'm going back to see Father again. So what I'm saying is be accountable. At least be accountable to the Father for what you do in this area. Because it's tough. Because of the addiction stuff, and because of the social eating that we do, because of the kind of society that we live in that sits and types all day long and doesn't do fence posts like our grandfathers did. So we realize how tough it is. And for those, I didn't mean to shortchange the behavioral management of obesity. It is tough, and it's important, and you have to find what works for you. Okay, so we've left body composition, moving into nutrition. We've gone through fats, and the most important piece of carbohydrates, of course, is the foods I told you, the grains, the fruits, and the vegetables, and the dairy products. and the glycemic and what's called the glycemic index of a carbohydrate food. You can all put this down and look it up. There's a .com, believe it or not, called glycemicindex.com, written by a lady from Australia, where she takes the top 200 carbohydrate foods eaten in the world and shows you how high does the sugar go after I eat that, and how long does it stay above baseline before it comes back down. And every carbohydrate food has a little bit different index. For my farm boy brain, I can't memorize too many of them, but I only eat about 12 or 14 carbohydrate foods anyway. My wife, maybe a few more, maybe 20 or 22 or 23 carbohydrate foods. But if you think about it, you eat the same kind of stuff week after week after week most of the time, unless you go to Iranian restaurants or some strange place. So the fact is, you can learn the 10 or 12 carbs that you eat and learn which ones you're going to choose. I remember that the glycemic index of 8 ounces of grapes takes my sugar to about here and my insulin to about here. And the same 8 ounces of strawberries takes my sugar to about here and my insulin to about here. That's just the difference between 2 little fruits that we all eat that are good for us. Remember, carbohydrates have no fat in them, not an ounce of fat in wheat or oats or rye. Not an ounce unless I put oil with it and bake it into pie crust. Now it's got oil and everything in it. But the basic food, the basic carbohydrate food, Wheaties out of the box, is 100 calories an ounce dry and about 25 calories an ounce wet. Pasta, about 25 calories an ounce wet, 100 calories dry. We add water to it, it dilutes it out. So our pasta foods taste good to us, and we eat a lot of them, and our problem is we eat them in volume, and they all make our insulin levels go up, every one of them, and if we're pre-diabetic or have high insulin levels, we don't want to do that very much, so we would move back toward the protein foods, or even protein and fat foods, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. But the only thing I want you to know about for sure with carbohydrates is they all have this glycemic index thing, and some foods have higher ones than others. Obviously, simple sugars like a Coca-Cola or something makes my sugar go way up to there, and my insulin chases it up. Remember, insulin and glucose are God's plan for us. That's okay. It's just that we'd like our insulin to go up and come back down to 0 to 5, not down from 20 to 12, because probably the insulin hurts us in our arteries. Okay, then let's move to fats. We got 2 left. Remember, I told you can go up to H-E-B. There are only 6 things in all the foods we buy up there, right? Water, fiber, protein, carbohydrate, fat, and alcohol. Ain't nothing else. Those are the macronutrients, big stuff, macronutrients. So we're going to talk about oil first. Protein and carbohydrates generate 4 calories per gram of them. Not very high calorie generators. Fats, oil, generates 9 calories per gram. In the big schema of foods, that are between 0 and 250 calories an ounce, we got oil at 250, we got water at 0, and as I said last week, most of the things we eat are between 0 and 50 calories an ounce. All fruits are about 15 calories an ounce. Vegetables, as I think I may have mentioned last week, there's 2 groups of vegetables. Did I talk about this last week? 2 groups of vegetables. There's the starchy ones and the unstarchy ones. And the starchy ones are give us about 25 calories an ounce. There's 5 of them. I can remember them. My brain will get that far. That's potatoes, peas, corn, yams, and all the beans. All of those things generate 25 calories an ounce. Everything else you call a vegetable generates 10 calories an ounce. And we talked about the fact that that's broccoli and green beans and cauliflower and beets and okra. All of them have carbs and fiber and water, no fat. None of those foods I mentioned has a gram of fat in it at all. No oil. Now, oil then is found where in food? Well, we can dump it in with Wesson oil or Crisco. We can just put it in. We can go buy it at H-E-B, and it has 250 calories an ounce, generates 9 calories per gram, more than twice what carbohydrates and protein do. And so for the last 25 or 30 years, fats have gotten kind of a bad hit, haven't they? Now, interestingly, Dr. Adkins said in his book, eat all of the steak and eggs that you want. And remember, steak and eggs are a mixture of protein and oil. All of meats are mixtures of protein and oil. Some meats have less oil with them than other meats. I was always taught that there was a cascade from fishes to birds to cows to hogs, but it isn't quite that simple. I was also taught that things that run around fast don't have much oil mixed with the meat, and things that stand in a feedlot tend to have quite a lot of oil mixed with the meat. But our fats come to us either as oil that we add to foods or natural oils that are with the foods. And all meats, almost all meats have oil, with the exception of maybe white fish or tuna, water-packed tuna that's really down there low. And remember that all meats generate 7 grams of protein per ounce. So if you wanted to have a 100-gram protein diet, you'd have to eat, 14 or 15 ounces of meat to get that 100 grams in it. But remember that that's where we get our oil, and then when we're on diets and trying to lose body fat, of course, we would tend to eat leaner meats, like the South Beach diet said. You would eat birds and fishes mostly, or very lean cows, round steak with all the fat cut off, or very lean hog, very lean pork. That would be Canadian bacon, right? 50 calories an ounce. So you can get, God gave us different animals that give us our meat. And eggs are 7 grams of protein, remember, per egg, but they also contain enough fat that they give us about 7 grams of oil with each egg that we eat also. So if you're going to try to really be on a rigid diet, you'd eat mainly egg whites. And my wife always orders an egg white omelet everywhere she goes. Always egg white omelets. I know it's coming, It costs an extra $1 maybe, but it's okay. She's worth it, okay? So, but eggs themselves are not bad foods, and I don't have time to talk about cholesterol and heart disease. Maybe that's another 2 lectures here some other time. But I think cholesterol is absolutely a good food, and there's nothing wrong with it. And I don't think cholesterol causes things. I think cholesterol in our blood is a marker of risk for things, but we really can't make our blood and our cholesterol in our blood go a lot higher by eating eggs or eating shrimp or something like that. You might try it sometime, but it won't really work. Your cholesterol is what it is. Most of you know that by now. It kind of is what it is. Now, eating too much fat will make our liver make more cholesterol. But cholesterol by itself does not cause disease. I know that's heresy, and when you listen to the ads on TVs. So everybody got it? So oils generate 9 calories per gram. You would not want to eat a lot of oil and not cook things in oil or fry things in oil if you plan to keep the calories down in the food you do. And that's been our problem in our last 40 years is frying things. Because you triple the calories in the food. You triple the calorie in the potato. Remember, your potato goes from 25 calories an ounce to 75 calories an ounce when you fry it and call it a French fry. So do I like French fries? Yes. Do I eat them very often? Not very often. I reward myself when I'm on trips and vacations by stopping at McDonald's and having a French fries. But do I think that oils are toxic to us? No, I don't think really. I don't think the data is really there to suggest that any oil is toxic or poisonous for us. When we eat too much oil, we will get too much fat for sure at 9 calories per gram. But I don't think there's a shred of evidence that oils hurt us. Perhaps people who eat saturated fats all day long, it's 18 chain fatty acids, may have slightly more disease. But I kind of go with the Apostle Paul where he said, all things are good and nothing to be refused if it be received with thanksgiving, for it's sanctified by the word of God and prayer. Sounds good to me. No such thing as a poison food unless it's poison for you. If you have an allergy when you eat it, don't eat it. If it makes you sick every time you eat it, don't do that. That's stupid. Don't do that. But the truth is, you eat things and consider that God gave us all foods and they are all good for us. But we have to be careful with oil because of the calories. Now, one food that I wanted to mention under oil that has been shown now by the Seventh-day Adventists first and more recently in a big international study to be good for us and actually make us live longer is nuts. Nuts are interesting. In my scale of 0 to 250, guess where nuts lie? Closer to 0 or closer to 250? Close to 250. Believe it or not, there's only 2 foods below 250, or only 1 food below 250 before you get to nuts. You got butter at 200 calories an ounce, and then you get to nuts at 175 calories an ounce. Nuts contain 4 grams of protein per ounce. That's 4, and a gram gives you 4 calories, so that's 16 calories of protein in nuts, in an ounce of nuts, and 159 calories of oil in that ounce of nuts. And so I have given nuts a bad rap over the last 30 years when people were doing diets. And you do have to be careful with them if you're doing a diet. But the Seventh-day Adventists showed in a study from Loma Linda about 25 years ago that people that ate walnuts outlived people who didn't. And people listened to that, and a lot of guys poo-pooed it and said it wasn't true. And 2 years ago, some guys did a study on 120,000 people from 10 different medical centers. And guess what? The people that ate the nuts had an 18% across-the-board decrease in death rate. So nut oil, something in nut oil is very good for us. And it turns out that the oil that's in nuts is very similar to the oil that's in salmon and in white fishes and oily fishes. So, and it's the same oil that's in flax products also. God gave us a grain that has that kind of oil. He gave us a fruit, nuts, that have that kind of oil. I always call nuts a funny fruit. You know, it grows on a tree like apples do. It just isn't 15 calories an ounce. It's 175 calories an ounce. So I think I would urge you to say there are no fats that are poison, and there are one set of fats that are not only poison but beneficial for us. We all ought to eat a little bit of nuts. But I said a little bit. You know, a guy gave me a 5-pound box of cashews one Christmas, and I ate them all. I stuck them in my closet, and I kept going back to them, and I ate them, and I finished them up around the 15th of January, and I finished on the scales about 8 pounds heavier than I had been before Christmas. So you have to be real careful with nuts, but suffice it to say that things that are in nuts are good for us. You got me? It's the old story again of moderation is good, excess is not good. And I ate those nuts addictively. I hoarded them. I didn't even tell my wife about them. They came from the Sunshine Nut Company in San Antonio. It was one of my patients who did me ill by giving it. It was a wonderful 5-pound box of cashews. So anyway, know that there are some fats that are good for us. There are all fats have 250 calories an ounce to them and can really make you fat if you eat too much of them. But Atkins got away with it in his book saying eat all the steak and eggs you want. It was because he didn't let them eat any carbohydrates. So they didn't eat any breakfast cereal or any bread or anything like that. They just ate steak and eggs. Well, by golly, if you add up their calories at the end of the day, they were probably eating a 1,400 calorie diet with steak and eggs. You can eat quite a lot of steak and eggs for 1,400 calories. See what I mean? So I think the truth is you want to be balanced with your protein, carbohydrates, fats. And the fourth nutrient then is alcohol, ethyl alcohol. Alcohol is hard for me to teach because alcohol causes so much negative for our society. The Apostle Paul told people to take a little wine for the stomach. And I always tell people, I don't know how much that was, but it was a little wine for the stomach. And Jesus, of course, in his first miracle in Cana of Galilee made wine. And remember what the governor said? He said, everybody usually it brings out the good wine first and gives you the junk later. He said, this guy brought me the best wine last. So alcohol is interesting because it generates, now remember, protein's 4 calories per gram, and carbohydrates are 4 calories per gram, fats are 9 calories per gram, alcohol is 7 calories per gram. 7 calories per gram. And alcohol, interestingly, pure ethyl alcohol has no glycemic index. It kind of looks like a carb, but it doesn't raise sugar and insulin at all. Now, the stuff you drink the alcohol in, the tequila or the grape juice or the other things, have carbs in them, of course, and can raise your sugar and insulin, but the alcohol itself does not. And I think that the most bothersome thing to me, and I think I mentioned this to you before when you're trying to lose body fat, is that for 8 hours after we drink, we cannot use our fat as an energy source. For 8 hours after we drink, a guy from Switzerland did a very erudite study to show this. For 8 hours after we drink, we can't use up our fat for our energy source. You say, well, that's not very important for most people. Number one, I just drink a glass of wine at 5, and that's true. I think you got about 7 or 8 hours where you can't use your fat. And the truth is, most people are overeating all the time anyway, so they're either storing fat or breaking even, and it's not too big of a deal. The problem comes when you are dieting, when you're behind on your calories, or you're exercising a lot because you want to lose some fat from your rear end, and you're drinking at lunch, at supper, and a nightcap. Now you've got 20 hours a day where you can't use your fat for your energy, and you're behind on your calories and need your energy from somewhere, don't you? You're counting on using your fat, is what you are. But guess what you use instead of your fat? You use your quads. You use your biceps. You use your muscles and your bones for your energy if you drink all day while you're dieting. Make sense? And that's why alcoholics have little legs and big round middles so often when you've seen them. Make sense now? That's it. So this guy really did this study and showed it. So alcohol is fascinating in that it blocks fat utilization. I don't think it means we can't drink alcohol. It means we don't drink alcohol 4 or 5 times a day. I think I only did that one time in my life. I was on a barge across the south of France, and they started serving wine and cheese at 10 in the morning, you know. How they did it, I don't know. But I'm just telling you, you got to be careful drinking multiple times per day, or you get into this, if you're behind on your calories. Now, if you're plus on your calories, bless you, my soul, you'll just store some more fat, because the alcohol generates 7 calories per gram, and you'll store some fat along with all the other food that you ate, and you'll be fine. But the danger time comes with alcohol when you diet and drink. Don't do that. Don't diet and drink. Stay in, or if you do, you just drink your glass of wine in the evening before supper or something and not. It's enough. I think that I won't beat alcohol to death. Alcohol has some negatives. Remember, it's a neurotoxin. And I would mention that, remember that a woman who drinks every day doubles her risk of breast cancer. Alcohol upgrades estrogen receptors, makes you more like a woman taking Premarin. And alcohol, Debbie Cardell over at our office did a long paper on this recently. Almost all kinds of malignancies are doubled in people who drink a couple or 3 drinks a day. So I think in general, what you say is you drink your little bit of wine with supper, or you drink it when you go out for good Italian meals or French meals or whatever it is, but you don't drink at lunch and supper and the evenings. You just can't afford it. Number 1, you can't afford the calories, and number 2, you can't afford the blocking of fat utilization for people. Enough said. That's nutrition. I've cut it kind of short. You know, each one of these things is a lecture in itself, but we'll do it. We're doing okay here. We got 10 minutes. Okay, we're going to talk about fitness now. Next week, well, then that means we're going to talk about sleep and poisoning next week. We're going to have to cover sleep, poisoning, and what should we measure. I'm sorry, it is. We finish at 10:30, don't we? Yeah. Okay, activity. We've already talked about muscles. There are 4 components to fitness that all good professors tell us. There are flexibility. It's, can I go down and touch my toes? Can I bring my knees up to my chest? Are my muscles and my tendons flexible? And there's good evidence in the medical literature that people that have good flexibility don't tear a joint when they fall down. That's why we go to a Spurs game. What do we see the guys doing before they play? Lying down in the middle of the floor with somebody taking your leg and cranking it clear over the back. I'm always worried they're going to tear up somebody's muscle before the game got going, you know, when you see them do that. But it's important for us to be flexible, and all of us should have our little stretches that we do every day. I'd admit I'm not as faithful as I should be to do that. Theoretically, we're supposed to do a little stretching before we do a good exercise. We're supposed to do some good stretching after we exercise so that we put our muscles back in the condition they were in. Even if you finish doing biceps like this, then you do something with them that takes them out like this for 30 seconds. Got it? Same thing with your quads. You know, if you've bent them a whole bunch of times, you do something that straightens them all out and lets that muscle go back into its natural position. So that's flexibility, and it's mostly protection against injuries. The second component is strength, and we've already talked about that before. And strength in a muscle, it doesn't require you to do it lots of times, not lots of reps. Most good strength trainers say that if you wanted to have as good a biceps as you wanted to have to carry your grandchildren around, you would do no more than 10 reps 3 times a week. 10 reps with a certain weight. And the weight that you should do it with, if you want to gain strength, is 30% below your peak. So if you're capable of a 50-pound curl, men, most women would not be able to do that, but if you can curl a 50-pound dumbbell like this, your workouts should be about 30% off of that, maybe at 30 pounds, okay? And do 5 to 10 reps, and you will get stronger muscles. And the reason strength is important is what we just said before. When you fall, when you trip, we'd love to have those pectoral muscles and triceps catch us, wouldn't we? So we don't break our face. Or when we're 75, we don't break our hip. And which is, as you know, is associated with tremendous morbidity and mortality. So the goal so we've got flexibility, we've got strength, then we've got abdominal endurance. Dr. Hockey from Trinity taught me a long time ago that the best muscle that we really need to have good endurance is these abs, from here to here, this one. And we should be able to do, all of us, 20 little crunches where we come up and down like that and keep those abdominal muscles tight. And then because they let us do all kinds of daily activities. And that's what endurance is beneficial for, is it lets me repetitively do this and move around and do things like that. Those abdominal muscles are always working. Strength, flexibility, endurance, and then finally something called aerobic capacity, which I think is the most important one of all, which basically says, can you walk on a treadmill? Can you walk uphill on a treadmill? How fast will your pulse get if you do that? And how fast will it recover afterwards? And some of you who are sitting here in front of me, I know, have had exams out at our place. And you know, that's why I started doing treadmills years ago on people. Not so much to look for heart disease, as to see, do you have the capacity to walk for 12 minutes on a protocol? We do a protocol called the Bruce Protocol after Dr. Bruce from Seattle. But if you go up to the Cooper Clinic, they do a different one. It doesn't make any difference how you study it. The truth is that we should all have the capacity, unless we're hobbled up with knee injuries or other kinds of things, we should have the capacity to go for a walk and to walk up a hill. You say, what's the evidence? And I know you've heard me talk about these papers before. What's the evidence that either activity or fitness makes any difference at all? Tell me, doctor. I mean, I've known people who never did diddle squat all their life, and they lived to be 97. And you're right, they're out there. You say, well, is there any evidence that people that are active live longer than people who aren't active? There, I got you. Okay, remember, I've been teaching a paper. I know, Joe, you've heard this paper and more times than not where I've talked about it. But a guy named Paffenbarger at Harvard 30 years ago decided to study the issue of activity versus death. And forgive me if this is boring because I know you've heard it before, but he decided to study activity versus death. And he decided to study it by then looking at 17,000 male alumni of Harvard. I said he picked guys because we die quicker. Guys, women outlive men, by a few years. I think he also picked the Harvard guys because he figured they might answer the questionnaires that he gave to them. I don't know what the inducement was. But anyway, he studied 17,000 guys. And he looked at, for 21 years, he looked at how many miles they walked a week, how many stairs they climbed in a week, how many hours of light sports like doubles tennis or dancing with your wife. I shouldn't say that. Some of these dance contest people really work out hard, don't they? Yeah. And then the last one was how many hours per week of heavy sports like full court basketball or soccer. And then he asked them one other question, how much do you weigh? Because if you know how much you weigh, you know how many calories you burn walking a mile. Remember, to move 150 pounds of Dave Player, I haven't been 150 for a number of years, but if I moved 150 calories of me 1 mile, I burn 100 calories walking. So you can do that, your computation for yourself this morning. So a 200-pound guy burns about 135 calories a mile. His little, 90-pound wife only burns, 80 calories a mile. It's not fair, ladies, I know, but it's the way it is. Anyway, the bigger you are, the more calories you burn working somewhere. That's a physics problem. Anyway, Paffenbarger looked at that. He looked at 17,000 guys, and over the course of 21 years, 1,400 of them died. So he had about an 8% death rate. And then he followed them, and you'll remember the story that for the walkers, the guys who walked more than 9 miles a week, there was a 21% across-the-board drop in death rate compared to guys who didn't walk at all. Just the walkers. The stair climbers dropped their death rate about 15% in 20 years. The 3-hour dance with your wife guys dropped their death rate 30% in 21 years. And the guys that played full court football and basketball or whatever it was dropped their death rate about 35%. And when you added up all the calories that those guys did and plotted them against death from accidents, heart disease, and cancer, straight linear drop in death rate. In other words, everything you did through 2,000 calories a week of exercise was a few more hours of life for you. That cool? It was a straight line. Unbelievable for the first 2,000 calories. When you got to 2,000 calories a week, the death rate started to go flatter. And when you got to 3,500 calories, it bottomed out. In other words, you got your best bang for the buck at 3,500 calories. And after 3,500 calories, it went up. And everybody who's ever studied this since that time has seen the same J curve. So if you're running 50 miles a week, you're on the tail end of the J curve. Don't do that. Don't do that. You may do okay now, but you won't do okay for 20 years. You'll run down your immune system and die quick. But for the majority of us sitting in this room, it's in the first 2,000. Let's get them, shall we? Let's find a way to get 2,000 calories a week of moving about. If we do, we get to eat a lot more food. We get to drink a lot more. We can even eat addictively and get away with it, maybe. Probably not red and green M&Ms, but anyway. Okay, so remember, Dr. Paffenbacher showed first 2,000 calories a week that you expend. A big 250-pound man who goes for a 1-mile walk, can get in a week at 1,700 calories right there. Just going for a 1-mile walk. Give me a break. We can do that. 2,000 calories. So that's the first paper. And I always tell people that paper said that God intends us people to move about. We were not ever intended to sit in offices all day long and type and answer phone calls. Our grandfathers had it better. We were supposed to park our car over there to walk into the H-E-B store, not drive around for a half hour to get the place up next to the H-E-B store. Don't do that, ladies. Now, if you're infirmed, and you got a sticker on your car, look for the one close to the H-E-B store. But otherwise, pick that spot out there where your car isn't going to get dinged and walk on in. Make sense? The second piece of that paper came from Dr. Cooper, the second paper that I want you to know. Dr. Cooper, but Dr. Paffenbacher was on that paper. I think I've maybe gone over that. I know I have with several of you. And that was the paper on fitness, time on the treadmill versus longevity. Remember, are people that can walk up a hill at Aspen going to live longer than people who can't walk flat in San Antonio? That's the question. And so Dr. Cooper decided to study that about 25 years ago up in Dallas at the Cooper Clinic, and he looked at 10,000 men and 3,000 women, this time not just a male study, and he looked at time on the treadmill versus death rate. Again, from accidents, heart disease, and cancer. And he followed the people for 14 years and then published his paper. And I always say that in this paper, you've got, to figure this one out, you've got two ladies, they're both fat, they both have high blood pressure, they both smoke, they both got diabetes, and both of their mothers died when they were 54 of heart attacks. Got them? Got the picture? They both look the same to you. They're identical in every way about the things that we think. And they both smoke. I forgot. Okay? And now you're going to follow them, and one of them gets on the treadmill and goes 6 minutes on her Bruce test. That would be, she finished the last 3 minutes at 2.4 miles an hour up a 12% hill. And that was it. She was out of gas at 6 minutes. The other gal, God bless her, I don't know how she did it, but she went 14 minutes on the same test. Same risk factors, 14 minutes. Any difference in how they'll turn out in the next 10 or 15 years? Well, that's what this study showed from Dr. Cooper. And I remember the numbers. For the men who were in the 6-minute group, there were 64 deaths per 10,000 man years. For the men who were in the 14%, who were the 14-minute guys, had only 16 deaths. 64 deaths and 16 deaths. Difference between the fit guys and the unfit guys. And the girls were even better. 39 deaths for the 6-minute girls, 8 deaths per 10,000 man years for the fit women. I look out and see you girls that are fit. And remember, I think we can be fit even when we're 87. Those of you who are in your 70s and 80s, we just have to do it a little bit more gently. But we can have our own fitness programs for our quads, for our pecs. I told you, even lean on the table at your house. Make your muscles better. You know, if you can't do a woman's push-up, do it off the table. Any way you can. So those two papers, you put them together and they say, do something, you'll live longer. Didn't make too much difference whether you walked, climbed stairs, played sports, went dancing with your wife. Okay? And the second one is, do some of it just a little sweaty, if you will. Walk up the hill a little bit harder. Find the hill in your neighborhood that's a little longer and walk up that one and then coast down. Got me? That's how we get a little more fit so that our time on our treadmill goes gently upward instead of gently downward. Now again, unfortunately, aging makes our times drift downward. And I'm not doing the same as I did when I was 50. But we can all be pretty good. So I'll finish today. I'm behind my time. I'm sorry I'm 3 minutes late here, but we're done with nutrition. We're done with body composition. We're done with fitness. Next week we will move off into poisoning, into sleep, into spiritual health, and into what we should measure. And I'll have to pray about which ones of those to go to. So thank you for your eye contact. Great to be with you. You're just a wonderful group to talk to. God be with you. See ya.